Hello friends, Nayaswami Hriman here, and this is the first of a total of 5 broadcasts on the questions, the big questions, if you will, which is to say Paramhansa Yogananda's interpretation of creation, the meaning, the purpose, the existence of things like suffering and evil, the kind of big questions. And this is taken from his interpretations principally of the book of Genesis of the Bible, along with, of course, his own understanding of the creation myths from India as well. And so I'm going to start with the question, who's to blame? You know, Yogananda would sometimes say that he argued with Divine Mother on why you created us. Have you ever wondered, by the way, surely you must have, where was I before I was born? And of course, everyone wonders, to where will I go when I die? Do I simply disappear? How did I come from nothing and yet exist? So these are the questions that have puzzled humanity since the beginning of humanity's time, at least. And so Yogananda would argue with Divine Mother because this world, obviously, regardless of whatever the answers are to those questions, where I came from and where do I go, one thing is obvious: we didn't create this place. We didn't create the earth. We didn't create our parents. We didn't create our larger family or our community or the nations which go to war or enjoy peace. And so this question of who's to blame, and yet there it is, you know, I punched my little brother and I can do all sorts of things. I can be a successful businessman. I can be a surgeon and heal people. And so this question of who's to blame, who is the doer? We can't deny our own existence, or I suppose we can, and someone who perhaps unfortunately commits suicide seeks to destroy themselves. Others, perhaps in hurting or killing others, hopes to destroy them. But nonetheless, you know, we see that we exist. We see that we have motivations, desires, and fears. We see that we can create better health, perhaps, or ruin our health. We see that we are a causative agent in so many things in our lives, and yet in so many important things we are not the causative agent. And so sometimes we feel helpless even. So what we find, is undeniable, is the polarity, the duality between I, myself, and others or the world around us. And so when we ask the question, who's to blame for all this, what is the causative agent and ultimate purpose of all things, we see the polarity of myself separate from others. But even that simple existential fact doesn't really answer the question. And so it is, humanity has had the search for who created this world, why they created it, and why it is the way it is, which usually means why is there suffering. And so in these 5 broadcasts, I'd like to explore the creation myth in the West that's the best known, which is Genesis, and of course Adam and Eve, and touch upon some of the stories from the East, from India specifically. The stories, all of which attempt to explain these important questions. Now, in Genesis, we have chapters 1 and 2, which are the main focus of Yogananda's commentary anyway. And the one has to do with the big picture, the macrocosm of we'll just call it how this earth was created, but the earth, I suppose, is a metaphor for the universe. in chapter 1. Chapter 2 descends from the macro to the micro immediately into Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve, just as the earth represents or stands in the place for the universe, so Adam and Eve stand in place for you and I. And so these are the questions that all great scriptures have to answer. And in the scriptures, there's always a causative agent of a divine being. And the explanations given or not given as to why this divine being, who has so many names and no name, why the creation took place, varies according to the creation myths and the explanations of the great saints and sages of East and West. How it relates to you and I usually involves, getting back to my original question, who is to blame? We have to take some level of responsibility for our lives. And so it is that as we take some responsibility, whatever and whoever it is did the big creation has to take some responsibility for that. And so we have this divine play. I'm setting the stage rather for the whole big picture. We have this divine stage in which we have two people, you might say, two forces, two beings in play. We have the macro and the micro. You could see it as your parents and yourself. In any case, what we're going to focus on is the divine being, which we, for shorthand, will use the word God, G-O-D, could be called many things, and is called many things. And then for you and I. In addition to this basic interplay between the separate self and the divine self is the question of the linear in time. We see this specifically in the Bible myth or story, I should say, of Adam and Eve, because Adam and Eve are described as being the first parents of humanity. And so they leave for us, bequeath to us, the impact and consequences of their error. And so that's a third factor that flows through the big questions, is the lineage, the legacy, the progression in time and space of the consequences of action. This finds, it finds expression in the Eastern teaching of karma and reincarnation. And in the West, which is to say the Abrahamic traditions, we start with basically Adam and Eve, and we all inherit the consequences of their singular action. The consequences of that singular action we also find expression in the concept of eternal damnation or eternal reward in heaven and hell. So we see that in the Abrahamic traditions as well. So we have cause and we have effect. We have choice that plays into it. If God created this world, God made a choice. Okay? If Adam and Eve made a mistake, then they made a choice. Okay? And as they made a mistake and made a choice, so do we. So these are the elements of the big question. The elements of who, why. Now, I haven't touched on the how, and I will. And so these are all the aspects, and of course the consequences. So these are the elements, and we have the elements of my being a being separate, having a kind of integrity and a field of action and thought and emotions where I act, think, or feel, and there are consequences of what I do. And yet I play as a very tiny part at this day and age on the planet Earth, billions of people doing similarly, and whole galaxies, billions of galaxies. So this is what we're going to deal with. And for now, I'm just laying the groundwork, and in the next broadcast, we'll talk more specifically about creation, the process of creation. Okay.